The lights of the Grand Ole Opry never go out. On that stage, people see Randy Owen, his voice powerful enough to make all of America fall silent. They hear Jeff Cook's guitar, gentle as the southern breeze, yet sharp as a blade of steel forged in the dark. The audience applauds. Their names are called, their faces remembered. But behind that brilliance, there was always someone standing still. He never sought the spotlight. He never stepped to the center of the stage. He simply stood there, keeping the rhythm, holding the harmony, guarding the soul of Alabama from ever breaking. That man was Teddy Gentry, the bass player, but in truth, the heartbeat that carried nearly half a century of music. The quiet one, whose words, though few, never missed their mark. The man who never stood in front, but without him, Alabama would no longer be Alabama. This story is not about the lights, not about fame. It's about a silent heart that held an entire legend together. Some people are born to be seen, and some are born to keep everything from falling apart. This is the story of Teddy Gentry. Teddy Gentry was born in 1952, among the rolling hills that ripple like waves across Lookout Mountain in Fort Payne, Alabama. There were no city streets, no neon lights, only red clay, country wind, and the chorus of crickets echoing through endless southern evenings. He grew up on his grandmother's farm, an old wooden house, its roof darkened by time. Life there was simple to the core, mornings spent in the fields, afternoons tending livestock, and evenings gathered around the radio that played old Southern country songs. On Sundays, Teddy followed his grandmother to a small church on the hill, where hymns rose in raw, unpolished harmony. No instruments, no perfection, just faith and honesty. It was there that music first entered his life, not as a dream of fame, not as a hunger for applause, but as something that warmed the heart of a quiet boy, gentle, observant, and carrying within him an entire world of silence. From an early age, Teddy carried a calm spirit. He never competed, never raised his voice, never needed others to understand him right away. He only knew this: land, family, and music. These were the three things that gave life meaning. I don't sing so people will know my name. I sing because my heart needs sound to survive. And those humble roots, honest, simple, and unshaken, became the spirit of who he was, and later, the quiet soul of Alabama itself. In his teenage years, Teddy reconnected with his two cousins, Randy Owen and Jeff Cook, three young men, all raised on the red dirt roads of Fort Payne, carrying in their hearts a kind of Southern music, warm, honest, and unpretentious. They began playing in small bars along the coast, where cheap neon lights flickered across worn wooden floors, and cigarette smoke hung thick like evening fog. Their first name was Wild Country. No one knew who they were. There were no cheering crowds, just long nights of playing for strangers, people drinking to forget something in their own lives. The money they earned barely covered gas, a cheap meal, and the road ahead, from town to town, from one tiny stage to another, holding on to a faith as thin as a thread, but one that never broke. Some nights, they slept in the back of the truck. Some mornings, Teddy woke with an aching back and numb hands, yet still held his bass like it was his whole life. They never asked, "When will we be famous?" They only asked, "Tomorrow. Will we still get to play together?" Through miles of southern highways, rejection, and being overlooked, their brotherhood grew, strong and steady like the ground beneath their boots. And it was during those struggling years that the sound called Alabama was born. Not from studios, not from conservatories, but from sweat, patience, and faith. Sometimes the road isn't meant to lead us to glory. It's meant to test whether our hearts are strong enough to hold on to each other. They held on, and that was what mattered most. In 1977, after years of drifting through smoky bars and dusty county fairs, the three cousins made a decision, one even they couldn't predict the weight of. They let go of the name Wild Country, the name that had carried them through all the hard miles, and chose one that said it all: Alabama. It wasn't just the name of a state. It was home. It was the breath of Lookout Mountain, the air of Sunday mornings in a small church, the southern winds sweeping across endless summer fields. That name carried the sound of roots, of soil, of belonging. When they arrived in Nashville, Alabama didn't come as dreamers seeking approval. They came as men who already knew who they were. They didn't ask for a place. They made one. Their music wasn't pure country anymore. It was stronger, brighter, more alive. It carried the wild spirit of rock, the soul of Southern gospel, and the untamed pulse of rural life that Nashville had never truly heard before. It was the sound of freedom, of red dirt roads stretching endlessly toward the horizon. Then, the miracle happened. Tennessee River played on the radio, and for the first time, America stopped to listen. Feels So Right brought Alabama into living rooms, long-haul trucks, and the hearts of working people across the South. Love in the First Degree proved they weren't standing on the edge. They were leading the way. And when mountain music roared across the nation, everyone knew Alabama had just redefined country music. Fame came like a flood. Stadiums filled. Awards poured in, more than all the sleepless nights they had ever spent on the road. But what mattered wasn't the number. It was the meaning. When Alabama received the Grammy for Mountain Music, it wasn't just a trophy. It was a recognition that music born from red clay, small churches, and homesick hearts could stand proudly on the national stage. When they were named Entertainer of the Year 3 years in a row, it wasn't just an achievement. It was the first time in history a band, not a solo artist, became the beating heart of country music. And when Alabama was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame, the truth was undeniable. They weren't just famous. They had become history itself. Amid that blinding spotlight, Teddy remained exactly where he'd always been, his hand resting on the bass, eyes cast down toward the stage floor, his quiet posture as steady as ever, as if he were simply keeping time for another ordinary show. He never stepped forward, never demanded light, never needed his name shouted aloud, because Teddy always understood something the world often forgets. The one who keeps the rhythm never stands at the center of the stage, but without him, the whole song would fall apart. And Teddy chose to be the one who made sure Alabama never did. After more than 2 decades standing at the peak of glory, it seemed Alabama would forever remain an unbreakable family. But then, in 2008, the first crack appeared. Mark Herndon, the drummer who had performed with them since 1979, filed a lawsuit against Teddy Gentry and Randy Owen, claiming he had not received his fair share of profits from the album The Last Stand Tour, 2007. The courtroom became a place where all those long nights on the road, the embraces backstage, and the laughter shared on tour suddenly turned into evidence, testimonies, and legal paperwork. The case dragged on from 2008 to 2014. 6 years. 6 years of silence, tension, and no real winner. During that time, Teddy hardly spoke to the press. No statements, no defense, no criticism. When someone asked, "Why don't you speak up?" Teddy gave only one quiet answer. If you've ever called someone your brother, arguing in words only makes the wound deeper. Though the lawsuit eventually ended, the bond between them never fully healed. But Teddy's true tragedy did not happen in court. It came in 2017 when Jeff Cook, his cousin, his lifelong musical partner, announced he had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. By 2018, sharp-eyed fans began to notice during concerts. There were moments when Jeff's playing slowed, his steps grew heavier, and always, Teddy was behind him. Not as a fellow musician, but as someone quietly holding up a piece of his own soul. In the final shows of 2019, when Jeff could barely finish a song, Teddy placed a hand on his shoulder, gentle enough that no one could see, but steady enough that Jeff would not fall. Then came November 7th, 2022. Jeff Cook left this world. No press conference, no public farewell, no tears before cameras. Teddy said just one short sentence, the way he had always lived. We played together all our lives, and now the stage is missing one. Sometimes the greatest tragedy is not the cry. It's the silence after the music stops. And Teddy, the man who spent his whole life keeping the rhythm, now had to learn how to keep time for an empty space. After all the bright stages, the endless nights of performing, and the roaring crowds that seemed to never fade, Teddy always returned to one place: Gentry Farms, the quiet stretch of land that he and his wife, Linda Gentry, had called home since the 1980s. There were no stage lights there, no one calling his name. Only the sound of sunset falling across the fields, the distant lowing of cattle, and the wind weaving through the trees like an old greeting from his childhood. Teddy and Linda had married back when Alabama wasn't yet famous. She wasn't drawn to the spotlight. She was the one who kept his heart still when the whole world around him seemed to spin too fast. Life on the farm wasn't rich or grand, but it was enough. And it was real. Teddy still rose early, 5 a.m., just like when he was a boy living with his grandmother on Lookout Mountain. He'd check the barns, feed the cattle, and hum melodies that had not yet found their way onto paper. Music had never left him. But here, it wasn't for performance. It was his breath. Sometimes, stepping onto the porch and watching the golden light settle across the fields, Teddy would think of Jeff. The sadness came softly, like wind. Not the kind that tears you apart, but the kind that reminds you the wound once existed and somehow still lives beneath the skin. Sometimes, Linda would walk up beside him, gently placing her hand in his. No words, because the deepest pains don't need to be spoken. Then Teddy would quietly return to his daily rhythm, feeding the animals, checking the water, walking along the old wooden fence that circled the farm. No one saw him in those moments. No one knew what he was thinking. But one thing was certain: he never lost himself. Even after performing before tens of thousands, even after his name was etched into the Country Music Hall of Fame in 2005, even after living the kind of life others only dream about, in the end, he returned to who he truly was: a man of the land, of family, of music that never needed proving. Looking back at the long road from the 1970s to today, what people remember about Alabama isn't just the hit songs that once ruled the radio or the sold-out tours that lit up arenas across America. What made Alabama a legend was the feeling their music carried, the feeling of home, of the countryside, of a place your heart once belonged to. And within that sound, the harmony and bass of Teddy Gentry were the things people didn't see, but always heard, even if they didn't realize what they were hearing. Alabama's music stood apart because of its three-part harmony. Randy led the vocals, Jeff wove the melodies, and Teddy bound those worlds together into one seamless voice. Not too loud, not demanding attention, but remove him. And suddenly, every song would feel strangely hollow. That is Teddy's legacy. He is the part no one names, yet the one without which everything would fall apart. Throughout the 1980s, as Alabama dominated the charts and national television stages, countless young bands looked to them and realized something no one had dared to believe before. A country band could be a star. You didn't need a solo frontman. You didn't need one voice standing before all the rest. Then came groups like Shenandoah, Diamond Rio, Lone Star, Zac Brown Band, and Lady A. They all said the same thing. Without Alabama, we would never have dared to stand together as a band. But what made Teddy's legacy truly profound wasn't measured in how many artists he inspired or how many trophies they earned. It was the character he passed on to music itself. Honesty, humility, strength in silence. In an era where everyone wanted to stand in the spotlight, Teddy taught an entire generation of musicians that not everyone who's seen is the one holding things up, and not everyone who stands behind is small. His legacy doesn't live in the lights. It lives in the breath of every song. In the way modern bands blend voices instead of competing for them. In the lesson that music doesn't need a star, it only needs everyone keeping rhythm together. And that's why, even though his name may not echo as loudly as Randy's, or shine as brightly as Jeff's, or appear as often in the headlines, Teddy Gentry's name remains where it matters most. Not on magazine covers, but in the quiet respect of those who understand the roots of music. After more than 40 years on stage, Teddy Gentry slowly stepped back. Not because he had grown tired of music, but because he knew that sooner or later, a man must return to where he came from. By 2015, his appearances on major stages had become fewer. At reunion shows, he was still there, standing in the same familiar spot, his hand resting on the bass. But his eyes no longer looked toward the crowd. They seemed to gaze through it, toward somewhere farther, older, a place with the scent of wind, the sound of church bells, and morning fog drifting over the meadows of Lookout Mountain. After Jeff Cook's passing in 2022, Teddy's silence grew even deeper. No noise, no public grief. He simply returned to Bent Tree Farms, the place he had called home for nearly his entire life, and kept living just as he had before the world ever knew the name Alabama. Teddy's mornings begin before sunrise. He walks along the wooden fence, touching each plank as if checking whether time has weakened it. He lays out hay in the barns, fills the troughs with water, then pauses to watch the white mist settle softly over the wide fields. Mist so delicate it seems to vanish at a single touch. In those moments, there are no audiences, no applause, no lights, only a man. Simple, calm, and wise enough to understand that. Happiness is not something we chase. It's something we return to. Sometimes Teddy still picks up his guitar, not to perform, just to play for himself. He strums a few old chords, then stops, listening as the silence plays them back. On quiet afternoons, neighbors sometimes see him sitting on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the Appalachian hills. Not sad, not joyous, just peaceful. And in that peace, you can feel something Teddy has never said out loud. He has gone far enough. And now, he's finally home. Looking back on his life, Teddy Gentry would probably never speak of the awards, the blazing stadiums, or the endless tours that blurred time itself. He wouldn't talk about the Grammys, nor mention Entertainer of the Year, and certainly wouldn't boast about the Hall of Fame plaque hanging proudly on his wall. He would only talk about three things: family, the land, and the brothers he once played beside. Sometimes, when he stands alone in his pasture at dusk, the golden light of sunset spreads across the fields like a pale yellow blanket. He looks as though he's listening to something. Not the wind, not the cattle, but the old voices, the ones that once sang beside him for half a lifetime. Randy's voice, deep and full of faith. Jeff's voice, soft and clear, like water from a mountain spring. Now, there is only one voice left, and one empty space. People often say, legends are the ones who stand in the light. But maybe the true legends are those who keep that light from ever going out. Teddy never stood in front, never asked for praise, never demanded the spotlight to be his. He simply stood there, keeping the rhythm, holding the balance, making sure nothing fell apart, even when his own heart was breaking. And perhaps that's why his life leaves behind a simple truth, sharp as a blade forged in fire. Not everything great must be seen. Some things can only be felt when we listen with the heart, when the music stops, when the crowd fades, when the stage lights go dark. Teddy is still there, steady as the first day, not to be remembered, but to never forget who he is. As the sun sinks behind the Appalachian hills, the last light of day gently touches the fields of Gentry farms. There you can see a single figure standing still, quiet, unhurried, needing no recognition from the world. Teddy Gentry, after reaching heights most people only dream of, chose instead to return to the land, to his family, and to the peace that youth can never fully understand, but time always teaches. He doesn't need the sound of applause to know he has lived fully. He doesn't need the stage lights to believe his music has touched someone, because sometimes love doesn't need to be proven through noise. It only needs to endure through the years, through loss, through those who are gone. If Randy was the voice and Jeff was the soul, then Teddy was the heart. And the heart, though unseen, is what keeps everything alive. And what about you? What do you think makes a legend? The bright lights or the quiet endurance behind them? Share your thoughts in the comments, and together we'll keep telling the stories of those who lived and loved music with all their hearts. And if this story touched you, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next journeys into the lives of America's living country legends. Because every day there are still so many stories waiting to be told.